Thanks. Hi everybody, I'm very conscious it's Friday afternoon and it's chucking it down outside. It's been a really interesting little period for me around lots of things going on in the world or whatever, but this is actually the Great North Care Record. It's been something which, as I said, we got involved or got asked to be involved in a few years back, and it was really born out of, those of you who don't know, and I know you've had one very emotional patient story today, so I'm not going to make this one an emotional one, but they all are, which was around my dad. And just to give it a quick bit of context, I'm not really going to dwell on that too much, but just my dad would be fairly typical. He passed away in 2018. The last few years of his life, he flipped around. My mum passed away a few years before that, and he ended up in the care system, but with ongoing medical issues, which were complications from COPD, which he'd got late lung cancer in life, and he'd had a fairly successful operation about that, but the complications kicked in. So you can imagine, and he'd been a policeman his whole life, and in an earlier part of his life, he'd suffered with mental health, with depression. And so my dad had been in hospitals in Sunderland in his earlier career, in his earlier life. His GP had always been in Jarrow, in South Tyneside. He was living at the time in Gateshead. He'd had his operations in Newcastle. He was in and out of South Shields General, and a couple of times in Queen Elizabeth in Gateshead as well. So you can imagine that that's not untypical, is it though? You know, that's the sort of thing that happens. If you live in the northeast, you may well have that sort of journey through, particularly later in life. And the frustration, the catalyst for me kind of saying, guys, why doesn't this exist? Or hearing that someone was trying to make it exist and thinking, yes, absolutely, you need to go for this, was just as a son and the rest of the family, you know, the frustrations around one bit not knowing my dad's history, even from a couple of weeks ago, never mind what happened 30 years ago. So even a lot of the things that ended up being part of his social care program, there was no understanding that he'd suffered from mental health issues right through his life, from when he was in his 30s and had been on medication since then. And we didn't have records from the GP because, of course, his GPs had changed over the years, the various hospitals each time he was going in from care home he was in, which was in South Tyneside, but he lived in Gateshead. You know, we couldn't get the two talking to each other. So you get the picture. You all understand why that exists. It's historical. It's how things have developed. But things change. And really what I wanted to do this afternoon was to take the positivity that's obviously here now. We've moved and seem to have come quite a long way, but I'm hearing what the challenges are and understanding that for everybody this isn't a no-brainer. It might seem like a no-brainer on my side. It might seem to probably a lot of people out there in the world now that we need to understand that we live in this world where exchange of information and the digital world that we live in is part of our lives, and it's going to be increasingly part of our lives going forward. And certainly in the bit of our lives which we would all hope it could be of massive help, which is around our health and our social care. You know, why doesn't it work better, and can it work better? So I think most of us in this room, I hope, are understanding that that's where we want to get to, and that's what we want to do, but there are obviously challenges along the way. And what I thought I would do, I wasn't sure I was going to do this, but I'm just listening to some of the things you were saying, and if any of you heard me talk about this before, I apologise, but I think it is quite pertinent. I heard a lot about we talk a lot in sport about performance, and about performance change, and performance sharing, which actually never used to happen in sport in Great Britain. And I think the question came right when I was listening right at the beginning about this idea of how do we let people know the story you heard this morning, or my dad's story, but you want the positive stories, don't you, around about how it has made a change, how people in your industry are able to work better together, but also how it impacts in the cold face, if you like, with people in their real lives. And I used the story around talking about lack of investment and struggling along and kind of systems that were based on the way things were always done. Sport in this country was like that. And when we got to about the mid-90s, investment in sport had been really from school sport right up to elite sport. It didn't exist in elite sport. Now, to be fair, we got a thing called the lottery funding, which gave us a resource, but actually it was very much around things that we weren't sure we're making that much difference. It took 2-3 years to kind of click that it didn't need to be a new bar for the golf club, or new changing rooms for the cricket club, because they had good accountants and people who knew how to write bids, and that's basically, we wasted about a few £100 million. I'm not saying it's wasted, goodness sake, a bar and a golf club is really important. I get it, okay? But you understand what I'm saying. It was having no impact on sport, really. And then gradually people said, no, we need to use this money better. It's about people, and it's about inspiring people as well, and creating some performance change. And one of the things we were looking at was, how do we create that kind of idea that this is something that people can buy into? So one of the things was about, we need to bring events to the UK which can inspire people to want to be part of that, and that will hopefully help us then persuade other people who weren't as convinced that this is a good thing to do. And yes, out of that came the idea to bid for 2012. And I'll fast forward a little bit. There were some improvements made, and we went, you've probably heard this before, we were 36th in the medal table in 1996 at the Olympic Games. 36th. That was a performance thing of us against the rest of the world in sport. 36th, okay? And then we'd started to make progress, and we got back into the top 10, but we were still being well beaten by Germany and Italy and France, and yes, USA and Russia and China and the rest of it. And so the question was asked, when we won the bid for 2012, what does this mean for us? Right? What does this mean for the 26 Olympic sports, and actually the ones who aren't Olympic sports, the smaller sports, but for whom that environment was what they were part of? They might not be yet in the Olympic Games, but they're in the sports community. And what happened was, we kind of did this sort of thing. We had a couple of conferences and ended up having one big one in London, where I finally persuaded everyone to come together and be really honest about what their challenges were, and why was cycling doing quite well, and rowing were quite doing well with the new funding that had come along, but gymnastics were doing terrible. And actually athletics was a bit near. And swimming were a little bit up and down. And what we started to understand was, when we asked everybody, we got a bit like you have with your Q&A thing, everyone's kind of coming at it from their point of view, understandably, because that's the world that they live in. They're in their own silo, they're in their own area of working, and they may have considered the fact that they thought they were doing things pretty well. And of course I'd love to be better, but. And what we managed to do was, we asked them all actually to be quite objective about it, and put up, or asked them to, over lunch, after having a lot of 2-3 hours of not really getting anywhere, we said, look, go away amongst yourselves and come back to what could this really mean for your sport, okay? And between now and 2012, what would you look for as a real impact? What change would it make to your sport? And yes, we measure things in medals and people's in finals and things. And we got everybody's information back, and we managed to put up collated it onto a screen, and we projected we could come 5th in the medal table, right? Which was good. It was a big improvement. We were going to win twice as many medals as we had before, spread through the different sports. And we'd had that kind of objective approach to it. And then we were looking at it, and we were discussing it, and how many medals, and what it was going to mean. And then somebody actually put their hand up and said, excuse me, so that's USA, Russia, China. Do you know who was 4th in the projections? Australia. Any Aussies in the room? Good. Right. Small country like Australia still be outperforming us in an area which, now, what's that got to do with us? The point was, what happened then is people got emotionally involved, all right? And they went, no, come on, we have to be top, we might not be able to beat Russia and USA and China, but, because they're massive, but goodness sake, we should be able to beat Australia. There was no rhyme or reason for it, it was a vision. You were talking about before, it was just somebody, and you know what, everybody bought into it. But what we understood was, to make that happen, and by the way, we were 4th by 2008, and we finished in the top 3 in 2012, and we haven't dropped back since, okay? So it has made a massive impact. We didn't find rowers, we didn't find athletes, we didn't find swimmers, we're not paying them loads of money, that's not what happened. We invested in the system. We invested in the system. And the system, yes, is about coaches, but it's about research, it was about new boats, it was about being able to perform better, it was about, I became chairman during that period of the English Institute of Sport, which is our science and medicine. A bit like you were all saying about where's our digital budget. There wasn't one for science and medicine. But guess what? It was making those. You heard about the marginal gains things that cycling used to talk about? Not. You win medals in our sport by thousandths of a second, hundredths of a second. Not just our sport, all sport. So the idea was that people then started to share information and share the ability to. We created some pots of money, if you like, which were shared. Instead of, oh, there's your bit for rowing, that you get a bit of that, we were putting too many small bits into lots of different areas, and actually started to invest. Well, you know what? Endurance works in swimming, works in cycling, works in rowing, works in athletics. Who are the endurance experts? Where's the scientists who know about this sort of stuff? Who are the psychologists who understand that? They shouldn't just be sitting in one sport. So you kind of get what I'm saying. It was a system that we've invested in. We do not have the same people in the Olympic team as we had in 2012 in hardly any of the sports, but we're still winning the same medals. If you get the system working, if you invest in that bit of it, and you have to have the vision, and yes, it's about performance at the end of the day, but if you haven't got that in place, it's really hard to get the real performance change that you need. So be part of it. If you're not part of it, be part of it. I'm really, really passionate about this sort of thing, and listening to what you guys were saying, sport is full of all of the kind of analogies that you would expect, but they apply in real life all the time. You see it all the time. Yes, it's about funding, and yes, everyone's had to cope with horrendous situations where we're struggling, but you have to believe in it. You genuinely have to believe in it. There's people, I said tapping away, I think it's the leak. Yeah, there's laptops here, there's phones and things. Remember, could you have invented the World Wide Web? Is anyone old enough like me to remember when all that stuff started, and how many different systems there were, how many different laptop type things there were, how many different devices, how many competing versions, how long it would take to dial up, and that noise it used to make, and you think, is this really the future? But the point is, if someone has the vision, gradually everybody buys into it, and once everybody starts to buy into it, the momentum, and that's what you've been about. From what I'm hearing now, the momentum is starting to grow. And once that momentum starts to grow, inevitably, it's not a question you have to ask anymore. Should we be doing this? It's more about how do we do this and how do we make it better. And that for me is a massive change from when you start actually just trying to persuade people that it's worth doing. So the Great North Care Record is a massive success. And you have to shout about that as much as you can, because that's what brings others with you. When the other sports started to say, I'll give you an example, gymnastics. In gymnastics, when lottery funding first came around, we didn't give them any money. We couldn't give them any money because they had committees. And they had committees and fiefdoms and ways of working. They took more officials to the Olympics than they did athletes. It was a kind of old way of doing things. They were very amateur and very traditional in their ways and the way in which they thought. And for most of them, some of them had even been former performers themselves, but they saw them as not the real issue. It was more about the sport and when the Olympics comes around, who gets to go and wear the blazer and all the rest of it. And they were asked to change, and they were really against it, because what that meant was a little bit turkey's vote for Christmas. They didn't really have a performance program, they didn't know how to set one up, and they also had a fairly antiquated way of organising their sport. And yes, it's easy when you've got a character dangle like lottery funding, and you say if you don't change, you're not getting anything. And actually what we did initially was we funded 3 or 4 athletes. Remember Beth Tweddle? Mm-hmm. Beth was a single person performance programme. We funded her and our coach, not the federation, until the federation decided to change. But you know what, when they did, it got going so quickly. Remember by 2012 how many medals we started to win in gymnastics? We like gymnastics in performance programs because they win lots of medals. You know, it's a multidisciplinary sport. Whereas the hockey team, it's an expensive program, that one. And if they don't win, it's all gone, hasn't it? You know, you've got 40, 50 people in the squad. But I think the point I'm trying to make to you is, whatever sector you're in, whatever your discipline, whatever your silo you might find yourself in at times, or you think that you're in, you are part of this whole world of health and social care that is going to be and is incredible incredibly important part of our lives, and it needs to work better than it did before. It is working much better in the Northeast than it did before. We all know that already, but it can be so much better than it already is, and it has to be part of everything that's going on. I firmly believe that. And I think when you look at success stories, the Northeast has got some massive opportunities coming up next year at some point. The whole combined authority scenario, where we are trying to really act with one voice across a lot of different sectors, and this should be another one of them. And this is so important, I think, for the region. We can be world leading. We can have the vision to show people that we can do something better than anyone else in this country, perhaps better than other sectors in the world, or at least if it's not better than, it's at least as good, but it's what we need. It's how we make our region work. I did a thing the other day, and I was trying to talk about, anyone from Sunderland? Yeah, okay, you have to sometimes persuade people that Sunderland's a great place, okay? No, I don't have to, but occasionally people need convinced. But the point is about, we have this vision of the Northeast, or people around the world have a vision of the Northeast, that it's a place where we've had great innovations historically, and great things have been invented here, and we have great people, and boy do they like to have a good time, and they like a drink, and they work hard and all the rest of it. But it's the Northeast of England, and why that exists, I don't know, but it's inevitable. And sometimes we feed that ourselves too much. And this is such a good example, just in one sector, such a good example of something that's brilliant, that we need to tell people a little bit more about. So I said we need to make people proud to not only come from here, but you need to make people proud to work here, proud to live here, and also proud of what we're able to achieve here. And that, yes, it's an overarching thing, but the Great North Care Record for me is a massive example of how when people pull together collectively around something which is a vision, and yes, it's not been easy, and yes, there's lots of hard miles still to go, but it is going to make an incredible difference to people's lives going forward. And just to finish off, in case I saw a thing, was it last week? Well, I think it was World Health Organization or somebody, because I'm nearly in that now. And I think from 2024 in Europe, we'll have more 65-year-olds and over than 15-year-olds and younger. And that's not going anywhere else but more in that direction. So what you are doing now is going to, yes, it's going to affect, because I'm 39 now. I was 63 a couple of days ago. I know. But my point about that is, will it change my life? I hope it already has done what you're doing, but for goodness sake, those 15-year-olds and the 20-year-olds, think about the future. Think about what this can look like. Think about what this can and will be 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, because that's where it will have its real impact. And people will look back and they'll look at days like today and going back to the meetings I know that you've had over the last few years and say, goodness me, thank goodness those people did that, because it has made a massive difference. So keep up the good work. Please, please, please don't for 1 minute kind of let anyone tell you that you can't do it, or you shouldn't do it, or we haven't got the money to do it. Just keep banging on the door, keep punching through, and just tell them about 2012, okay? Just say, if you haven't got the vision, it ain't going to happen. There were so many naysayers around 2012 and how bad it was going to be for London, for the country, for everybody else, and it was completely the opposite. And now people now look upon that and they forget all the negativity that was around at the time. Great job, well done, and have a really, really successful period going forward, and try and keep dry over the weekend. Thanks very much.